The morning of August 22nd, 2024, began like any other Thursday at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden in Ohio. Visitors were already streaming through the turnstiles by 9:15 a.m. Families with strollers, couples holding hands, school groups wearing matching t-shirts and clutching permission slips. The air smelled like popcorn and sunscreen and the particular anticipation that comes with a day at the zoo. But somewhere beyond the carefully manicured paths and the cheerful signage, something was about to happen that would challenge every assumption we hold about animal behavior, about grief, about compassion, and about the invisible threads that connect all living beings regardless of species. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, drop a comment right now telling us what city or country you're from. We want to know how far this incredible story reaches, because what happened on that Thursday morning transcends geography, transcends culture, transcends everything we think we know about the emotional lives of animals. So pause for just a second and let us know where you are. Are you watching from New York? From Brazil? From somewhere in Europe or Asia or Africa? Tell us in the comments, because this story belongs to everyone who has ever loved an animal, who has ever experienced loss, who has ever wondered if grief is a uniquely human experience, or if it's something deeper and more universal than we've been willing to acknowledge. Sarah Chen was a senior keeper in the primate division, and she had worked at the Cincinnati Zoo for 9 years. She knew every gorilla in the troop by personality, by preference, by the subtle body language that indicated mood and health and social dynamics. But on this particular morning, as she prepared the daily enrichment activities for the gorilla habitat, she noticed something that made her stop and frown. There was a dog in the service corridor. Not just any dog, but a medium-sized mixed breed with matted brown and white fur, ribs showing through skin, eyes that held a depth of sadness that was almost human in its intensity. The dog was just sitting there, about 20 feet from the keeper entrance to the gorilla enclosure, not moving, not begging for food, not displaying any of the typical behaviors of a stray dog that had somehow found its way into a restricted area. Just sitting, watching, waiting for something that Sarah couldn't identify. Sarah's first instinct was to call animal control. The zoo had protocols for situations like this. Stray animals were a safety concern, a liability issue, a potential disease vector, but something about the way the dog sat there, something about the profound stillness and the eyes that seemed to hold more awareness than a dog should possess, made her hesitate. She approached slowly, making the soft clicking sounds that usually calmed nervous animals, and the dog didn't move, didn't growl or retreat, or show any sign of fear or aggression. It simply looked at her with those impossibly sad eyes, and Sarah felt something twist in her chest, a recognition of pain so deep it transcended species. "Hey, buddy," Sarah said softly, kneeling down about 10 feet away. "Where did you come from? How did you get in here?" The dog's only response was to turn its head slightly, looking past Sarah toward the door that led to the gorilla habitat, the outdoor enclosure where Jambo lived. Jambo was a 28-year-old silverback gorilla, one of the oldest in captivity in North America, and he had been Sarah's special responsibility for the past 5 years. She had watched him age, had seen the silver spreading across his back become more pronounced, had noted the way he moved more slowly now, how he preferred to sit in the shade rather than engage in the chest-beating displays that younger males performed. But what Sarah had really watched over the past 6 months was Jambo's grief. His mate of 15 years, a female gorilla named Kiki, had died in February from complications related to a heart condition. The veterinary team had done everything possible, but sometimes nature makes decisions that medical science cannot reverse. And from the moment Kiki died, Jambo had changed. He stopped eating regularly, stopped building his night nests with the same care, stopped interacting with the other gorillas in the troop. He would sit for hours in the spot where Kiki used to rest beside him, his massive hand occasionally reaching out to touch the empty space where she should have been. The zoo's animal behaviorists had documented it all, had written papers about primate grief responses, had tried various interventions to help Jambo through his mourning. But nothing had really worked. Jambo was, in the clinical language of the reports, experiencing prolonged grief disorder. In simpler terms, he was heartbroken, and he was dying from it. Sarah looked at the sad dog sitting in the corridor, and she looked at the door to Jambo's enclosure, and something connected in her mind, something that made no logical sense but felt true in a way that bypassed logic entirely. She pulled out her radio. "This is Chen in Primate Division," she said. "I need Dr. Martinez to come to the Gorilla Service corridor. Non-emergency, but urgent. Please respond." The radio crackled. Dr. James Martinez was the zoo's head veterinarian and senior animal behaviorist. He had 30 years of experience working with exotic animals, had published extensively on primate psychology, and had a reputation for being willing to consider unconventional approaches if the science supported them. He arrived 8 minutes later, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the zoo grounds, and found Sarah still kneeling near the stray dog, both of them now sitting in what looked like a silent communion of mutual sadness. "Sarah, what's going on?" Dr. Martinez asked, taking in the scene. "Why is there a stray dog in a restricted area? How did it even get in here?" "I don't know," Sarah said, quietly. "But Dr. Martinez, look at him. Really, look at him." Dr. Martinez had seen thousands of animals in his career. He had seen sick animals and injured animals and traumatized animals. But when he looked at this particular dog, he saw something that made him crouch down beside Sarah, his medical bag forgotten. The dog's body language wasn't just sadness. It was grief. Deep, profound, unmistakable grief. The same body language he had been documenting in Jambo for 6 months. The same posture of loss. "Where did you come from?" Dr. Martinez said, more to himself than to the dog. The answer came from an unexpected source. Security had been reviewing camera footage from the night before, trying to determine how a stray dog had breached the zoo's perimeter, and what they found was both heartbreaking and inexplicable. The footage showed the dog entering the zoo grounds at approximately 11:47 p.m., squeezing through a gap in the fence near the maintenance area that staff hadn't realized needed repair. But the dog hadn't wandered randomly once inside. It had moved with purpose through the dark zoo, past the elephant house, past the lion habitat, past dozens of enclosures, heading straight for the primate division, as if it knew exactly where it needed to go. Even stranger, the dog had stopped at several points and waited, as if checking directions, as if following something invisible. The timestamp showed it arrived at the Gorilla Service corridor at 12:33 a.m. and had been sitting in that exact spot for over 9 hours, waiting for morning, waiting for someone to find it, waiting for whatever came next. Dr. Martinez watched the footage 3 times. "This doesn't make sense," he said to Sarah and the security supervisor, Marcus Webb, who had brought him the video. "Dogs don't navigate complex environments with this kind of precision unless they've been there before. But we have no record of this dog ever being on zoo property. No staff member has reported a missing pet matching this description. So how did it know where to go? What is it looking for? Sarah was the one who said it first, even though she knew how it would sound. I think he's looking for Jambo. I think he needs to be with Jambo. The silence that followed was heavy with skepticism, but then Marcus Webb pulled up another piece of footage, this one from 3 hours earlier, at 6:15 a.m., when the first keeper had walked past the gorilla enclosure on morning rounds. The camera showed Jambo, who typically ignored human presence, standing at the mesh barrier of his indoor holding area, staring in the direction of the service corridor, staring at the exact spot where the dog sat on the other side of 2 locked doors and 30 feet of concrete. As if he knew the dog was there. As if he was waiting too. The decision about what to do was complicated by every protocol the zoo had. You couldn't just introduce unknown animals into secured habitats. There were disease concerns, safety concerns, liability concerns. The dog could be carrying parasites or viruses. It could trigger aggressive responses from Jambo. It could panic and injure itself trying to escape. The list of things that could go wrong was extensive and well documented in zoo management literature. But Dr. Martinez kept coming back to 2 facts. First, Jambo was dying. Not from any physical ailment that could be treated, but from grief so profound it was shutting down his body. He had lost 40 pounds in 6 months. His immune system was compromised. He showed no interest in life. The veterinary team had privately given him perhaps another year before the depression killed him. And second, this dog had somehow found its way to Jambo's enclosure through a complex maze of paths and barriers, and both animals were displaying the exact same behavioral markers of grief. The same posture, the same stillness, the same quality of waiting for something that wouldn't come. I want to run a full medical check on the dog, Dr. Martinez said finally. Blood work, parasite screening, vaccination status, everything. If it comes back clean, I want to consider a supervised introduction. Sarah and Marcus both started to object, but Dr. Martinez held up his hand. I know this breaks protocol. I know it sounds insane. But we have a gorilla who is literally dying from loneliness and grief. And we have a dog who somehow found him. I've spent 30 years studying animal behavior, and I've never seen anything like this. If there's even a chance that this could help Jambo, we have to try. The medical examination took 3 hours. The dog, despite appearing malnourished and neglected, was surprisingly healthy. No signs of contagious disease, no parasites, no infections. The veterinary team estimated his age at approximately 5 to 6 years old. Mixed breed, possibly shepherd and retriever ancestry. Male, neutered. And most surprisingly, he had a microchip. The chip was registered to an address in Cincinnati, to an owner named Margaret Patterson. But when they called the number on file, it was disconnected. When they looked up the address, property records showed the house had been sold 4 months earlier. Margaret Patterson, according to public records, had died in April. Sarah was the one who did the deeper research, driven by a feeling she couldn't name. She found Margaret Patterson's obituary online. Margaret had been 76 years old, a retired veterinary nurse who had worked at the Cincinnati Zoo from 1985 to 2010. She had spent 25 years caring for animals, with a special focus on primates. The obituary mentioned that she was preceded in death by her husband and was survived by her beloved dog, Cooper, who she had requested be adopted into a good home. Sarah pulled up the employee archives from Margaret's time at the zoo, and there, in a photo from 2008, she found it. A picture of Margaret in the primate division, smiling at the camera, kneeling beside a younger Jambo. The caption read, "Senior, veterinary nurse Margaret Patterson with Jambo, following successful treatment for minor injury. Margaret has been Jambo's primary medical caretaker for 12 years. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pulled up more photos, more records. Margaret had been there when Jambo arrived at the zoo as a 7-year-old transfer from another facility. She had been his primary medical contact for over a decade. She had administered his medications, treated his injuries, monitored his health. The records showed that Margaret had retired in 2010 and Jambo had been transitioned to new veterinary staff. But one notation in the file stood out. A note from the head veterinarian at the time: Jambo showed signs of distress following Margaret's retirement. Took several months to adjust to new handlers. Strong bond evident. Margaret had died in April, 4 months ago. The same time that Jambo's grief over Kiki had become noticeably worse, even though Kiki had died in February. As if he was mourning. 2 losses, not 1. And now Margaret's dog, Cooper, had somehow found his way across Cincinnati to the zoo, had navigated through complex terrain to reach Jambo's enclosure, and was sitting with the same grief posture that Jambo displayed. 2 beings who had both lost Margaret. 2 beings drowning in the same loss. Dr. Martinez stood in the observation room looking at the dog on one monitor and Jambo on another, and he felt the hair on his arms stand up. "This isn't coincidence," he said quietly. "I don't know what it is, but it's not coincidence." Sarah looked at him. "So what do we do?" "We introduce them," Dr. Martinez said. "Carefully, with full safety protocols, with emergency tranquilizers ready. But we introduce them, because I think Cooper came here for the same reason Jambo has been sitting in that same spot for 6 months. They're both waiting for Margaret, and maybe, just maybe, finding each other will help them both understand that she's not coming back. That they need to find a way to live with that loss instead of dying from it." The introduction was planned for 2 p.m., after the zoo had closed the gorilla exhibit to public viewing. The outdoor enclosure was large, nearly an acre of grass and trees, and climbing structures designed to mimic natural gorilla habitat. Jambo was given the option to stay in his indoor holding area or venture outside, and after 15 minutes of observation, he chose outside. He moved to his usual spot, a shaded area beneath a large oak tree where Kiki used to sit with him, and he lowered himself to the ground with the careful movements of an elderly primate whose body hurt in ways that weren't physical. The response team was in position. 6 trained personnel with tranquilizer rifles loaded with enough sedative to drop a silverback if things went wrong. Dr. Martinez and Sarah were in the observation building with a clear view and radio communication with everyone. And Cooper, the sad dog who had traveled across a city to reach this place, was led on a leash by a handler to the keeper entrance of the enclosure. The moment the door opened and Cooper saw Jambo 60 meters away beneath that oak tree, everything changed. Cooper made a sound that none of the staff had heard from him before. Not a bark or a whine, but something more complex, something that carried meaning. And then he pulled against the leash with strength that surprised the handler. Pulled hard enough that the handler had to make a split-second decision to either hold on and possibly hurt the dog or let go. She let go. Cooper ran across that enclosure, his matted fur streaming behind him, his thin body moving with purpose and speed, heading straight for the 450-pound silverback gorilla, who was now watching this approach with an expression that every primate specialist in the observation room recognized. Surprise. And something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Every person watching expected what happened next to be violent. Expected Jambo to perceive the running dog as a threat, to charge or roar or make aggressive displays. expected Cooper to realize his mistake and try to flee, expected intervention to be necessary within seconds. But what actually happened made Dr. Martinez's hand fall away from the radio where he was about to order the dog to be tranquilized. Cooper reached Jambo and didn't slow down. He ran right up to the massive gorilla and did something that made Sarah gasp aloud. He curled up against Jambo's side, pressed his body against the gorilla's massive frame, and made a sound that was heartbreakingly familiar. It was the sound of grief finding recognition, the sound of someone who understands your pain. Jambo's response was immediate and profound. The old silverback, who had barely moved in 6 months, except to eat and drink the bare minimum necessary for survival, reached down with one massive hand and touched the dog. Not roughly, not aggressively, but with a gentleness that seemed impossible from an animal his size. He touched Cooper's head, his back, his sides, with movements that were clearly exploratory, as if he was trying to understand something, as if he was checking for something he recognized. And then Jambo did something that made every scientist in that observation room understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jambo leaned down and smelled Cooper. Not the casual sniff of curiosity, but a deep, sustained investigation. And when he finished, he made a vocalization that the gorilla specialists recognized immediately. It was a comfort rumble, a sound that gorillas make to members of their family group who are distressed, a sound of reassurance and acceptance. Jambo had recognized something on Cooper, something that carried meaning in the olfactory language of mammals who navigate their world through scent as much as through sight. Cooper smelled like Margaret. After 4 months, even after being lost and wandering and dirty, Cooper still carried enough of Margaret's scent that Jambo recognized it, recognized the connection, understood that this dog had belonged to the same human who had cared for Jambo for 12 years of his life. And in that recognition, something broke open in both of them. Cooper began to cry, not dog cries, but sounds of grief so raw and human that several staff members had to look away. And Jambo, the dignified silverback who had maintained stoic silence through 6 months of mourning, began making sounds that the specialists had never heard from him before. Sounds of grief and comfort mixed together. Sounds that seemed to acknowledge that both of them understood loss in a way that couldn't be explained but could be shared. Dr. Martinez was crying openly now, his professional detachment completely shattered. "They're grieving together," he said, his voice breaking. "They both lost Margaret, and they found each other. They found the only other being on Earth who understands exactly what they're feeling." For 3 hours, the zoo staff watched as Jambo and Cooper sat together beneath that oak tree. Jambo held Cooper close with one massive arm, creating a shelter of warmth and protection. Cooper stayed pressed against Jambo's chest, occasionally looking up at the gorilla's face as if seeking reassurance that this was real, that he wasn't alone anymore. And sometimes Jambo would lean down and make his rumbling comfort sound, and Cooper would settle deeper into the embrace, and both of them would sit in the companionable silence of shared grief. The decision about what to do next was easier than anyone expected. Cooper couldn't stay in the gorilla enclosure permanently. There were too many variables, too many risks, too many unknowns about how the dynamic would develop. But the transformation in both animals during those 3 hours was so profound that Dr. Martinez made an executive decision. "We're going to create a joint habitat," he said. "We'll modify the keeper area adjacent to Jambo's enclosure. Create a space where Cooper can stay, where they can interact through mesh during the day, where they can see and smell and hear each other constantly. And during supervised hours, we'll allow direct contact. This isn't just about helping Jambo anymore. This is about recognizing that both these animals are in pain and they've found a way to help each other. We'd be cruel to take that away. The modification took 2 weeks to complete. A comfortable living space was created for Cooper, with a dog bed and food and water and all the care a dog could need. But the key feature was a large sliding door that opened into Jambo's indoor holding area, controlled by keepers but accessible whenever both animals wanted contact. The first night Cooper spent in his new space, staff watched through night vision cameras as he sat at the door, looking through the mesh at Jambo. And Jambo, who hadn't slept properly in months, built his night nest right against the mesh on his side, so that only 3 inches of barrier separated them. They slept like that, dog and gorilla, both finally resting peacefully because neither was alone with their grief anymore. The story of Jambo and Cooper went viral within 48 hours of the zoo releasing carefully edited footage of their friendship. News outlets from 70 countries picked it up. The video of their first meeting, of Cooper running across the enclosure and Jambo accepting him, was viewed 800 million times. But more than the spectacle of an unusual interspecies friendship, people responded to the emotional truth at the heart of the story. These were 2 beings who had lost someone they loved, who had found each other in their shared grief, and who were teaching the world that loss and love and the need for comfort aren't uniquely human experiences. Dr. Patricia Williams, a neuroscientist from Stanford who specialized in comparative emotion studies, came to Cincinnati to observe Jambo and Cooper. She spent 2 weeks documenting their interactions, measuring cortisol levels, analyzing behavioral patterns. Her findings, later published in the journal Nature, were groundbreaking. Both animals showed measurable decreases in stress hormones when in proximity to each other. Both showed improved appetite, better sleep patterns, and increased engagement with their environment. Most significantly, both showed behaviors that indicated they were using each other as what Dr. Williams termed grief companions, beings who validate the reality of loss and provide comfort not through distraction, but through shared acknowledgement of pain. In human terms, Dr. Williams wrote in her paper, "What we're observing is mutual therapy. These animals are helping each other process grief in a way that mirrors the most effective human bereavement support. They don't try to fix each other's sadness. They simply sit with it, acknowledge it, and through that acknowledgement, make it bearable." The implications for our understanding of animal, consciousness, and emotion are profound. Over the months that followed, Jambo's decline reversed. He started eating regularly again, started interacting with other gorillas in the troop, started showing interest in enrichment activities. He was still an old gorilla, still moving slowly, still marked by the years. But he was alive again in a way he hadn't been since Kiki died. And Cooper transformed too. The matted, skinny dog who had wandered into the zoo filled out to a healthy weight. His coat grew shiny and clean. He started playing with toys that staff provided, started greeting keepers with tail wags, started showing joy in simple things like sunshine and treats. But every day, without fail, Cooper would go to the door that connected to Jambo's space, and Jambo would come to meet him, and they would sit together, sometimes for hours, sometimes just for a few minutes, but always with the same energy of mutual comfort, of 2 beings who understood each other's pain and chose to face it together rather than alone. The zoo created a special program inspired by Jambo and Cooper. They called it the Companion Animal Initiative, and it was designed to explore whether other animals in the zoo who showed signs of depression or grief might benefit from carefully supervised interaction with companion animals. The results were mixed, as any scientific endeavor would be, But there were enough successes to validate the underlying principle. Animals in grief need more than food and medical care. They need connection, understanding, and sometimes the comfort that can only come from another being who knows what loss feels like. Sarah Chen, who had been the first to advocate for giving Cooper and Jambo a chance, became the program director. She gave lectures at veterinary conferences, published papers on animal grief responses, and consulted with zoos around the world who were trying to implement similar programs. But her favorite part of every day was still the morning hour. She spent sitting quietly in the observation area, watching a dog and a gorilla sitting together beneath an oak tree, finding peace in each other's presence. On a morning in June, almost 2 years after Cooper first appeared at the zoo, Sarah arrived for her shift to find Dr. Martinez waiting for her with an expression of profound sadness. "Jambo died during the night," he said quietly, peacefully, in his sleep. He was 30 years old. He had exceeded every expectation for a gorilla his age. Sarah felt her throat close with grief. "How's Cooper?" she managed to ask. Dr. Martinez pulled up the night vision footage from Jambo's enclosure. It showed Jambo building his nest as usual, showed Cooper in his adjacent space settling down for the night. But around 2 a.m., something changed. Cooper woke suddenly and went to the mesh barrier, whining softly. Jambo, in his nest, stirred and reached one hand through the mesh to touch Cooper. They stayed like that for approximately 15 minutes, connected, through the barrier. Then Jambo withdrew his hand, settled back into his nest, and by 2:47 a.m., he was gone. Cooper had known. Somehow, in the way that animals seem to know things we can't explain, Cooper had known Jambo was dying, and he had stayed at that barrier for the rest of the night, keeping vigil while the old gorilla took his final breaths. The question of what to do with Cooper now became urgent and emotionally fraught. He had spent nearly 2 years in a routine centered around Jambo. What would happen to him now that his companion was gone? Would he fall back into the grief depression that had brought him to the zoo in the first place? The answer came from Cooper himself. In the days after Jambo's death, Cooper showed signs of sadness. He was quieter than usual, ate less enthusiastically, spent time sitting at the mesh barrier where Jambo used to meet him. But he didn't fall into the profound despondency that had characterized him when he first arrived. He had learned something from his 2 years with Jambo. He had learned that grief, while painful, could be survived. That loss didn't mean the end of everything. That memories of love could coexist with the pain of absence. Dr. Martinez made the decision to keep Cooper at the zoo as a permanent resident and program ambassador. Cooper's living space was maintained, but he was also given increased socialization time with staff and with visiting children in specially designed therapy sessions. Cooper seemed to understand his role, seemed to sense that he had something valuable to offer to people who were struggling with their own losses. Children who had lost pets or family members would sit with Cooper, would stroke his soft fur, and Cooper would lean against them with the same gentle presence he had offered to Jambo, as if he understood that grief needed witnessing, needed acknowledgement, needed the simple comfort of another being who had walked through darkness and found a way back to light. The memorial service for Jambo was attended by staff, volunteers, and the few people who had known him for decades. They planted a new tree next to the oak where Jambo and Cooper had spent so many hours together, and they installed a plaque that told their story. Not the scientific version or the viral social media version, but the simple truth of two beings who found each other in grief and taught each other how to live with loss. 5 years after Cooper first appeared at the Cincinnati Zoo, Dr. Martinez gave a TEDx talk about animal grief and interspecies compassion that was viewed 15 million times. In it, he told the complete story of Jambo and Cooper, from Cooper's mysterious arrival to their 2 years together, to Jambo's peaceful death and Cooper's continued life as a therapy dog. But the part of the talk that resonated most deeply, that was quoted and shared and referenced in countless articles and discussions, came at the end. We like to think that compassion and grief and the ability to comfort others in pain are uniquely human traits, Dr. Martinez said, standing on stage with Cooper sitting calmly beside him. We like to believe that we're special, that our emotional lives are more complex and more meaningful than those of other animals. But what Jambo and Cooper taught us is that grief is a universal language. Loss transcends species. And the need for comfort, for acknowledgement, for someone to sit with us in our darkest moments and simply say, through their presence, that we're not alone, that is not uniquely human. That is the language of all beings who love. Cooper didn't understand the human concept of death. Jambo didn't have human theories about afterlife or meaning. But both of them understood loss in the most fundamental way possible. And when they found each other, they did what all grieving beings need to do. They acknowledged each other's pain. They sat with it. They didn't try to fix it or explain it away. They simply bore witness to each other's suffering, and in that witnessing, they made it survivable. That is the lesson that crossed species barriers and touched hearts around the world. That grief shared is grief diminished. That no one, regardless of species, should have to face loss alone. That the simple act of presence, of sitting with someone in their pain, is one of the most powerful forms of healing that exists. Cooper lived to be 12 years old, a good long life for a dog of his size. He spent his final years continuing his work as a therapy dog, bringing comfort to children and adults who were struggling with loss. And when Cooper died peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 2031, the zoo held another memorial service. They buried his ashes beneath the tree that had been planted for Jambo, bringing the two companions back together in the only way that remained possible. The legacy of Jambo and Cooper extended far beyond one zoo in Cincinnati. Their story became a touchstone in discussions about animal consciousness, about the ethics of how we treat animals in captivity, about what we owe to beings who experience emotions as deeply as we do, even if they can't express them in human language. Zoos around the world implemented companion animal programs. Researchers designed new studies on animal grief and bereavement. Veterinary schools added courses on recognizing and treating psychological distress in animals. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the millions of people who watched the footage of a sad dog running across an enclosure to curl up against a grieving gorilla. People who had lost loved ones, who were struggling with their own grief, who felt alone in their pain. They saw in Jambo and Cooper a reflection of their own need for comfort and connection. They saw proof that grief is not a weakness or a pathology, but a natural response to love, and that seeking comfort from others who understand is not just acceptable, but necessary. If this story touched you, if it made you think differently about animals or about grief, or about the ways we connect across seemingly impossible divides, we need you to do something. First, hit that like button. Let YouTube know that stories like this matter, that content about compassion and connection and the emotional lives of animals deserves to be shared widely. Every like helps this story reach more people who need to see it. Second, subscribe to this channel. We're committed to bringing you stories that challenge assumptions, that expand understanding, that prove that consciousness and emotion exist in forms far more diverse than we typically acknowledge. By subscribing, you're supporting content that treats animals as the complex, feeling beings they are, rather than as entertainment or resources. Third, and this is the most important part, we want you to comment. Tell us if you've ever experienced a moment of unexpected connection with an animal. Tell us about a pet who helped you through grief or loss. Tell us about a time when an animal seemed to understand your pain in ways that humans couldn't. Tell us your own story of interspecies compassion, because every comment helps the algorithm show this video to more people. But more than that, every comment creates a community of people who understand that the boundaries between human and animal emotion are far more blurred than we've been taught to believe. And finally, share this video. Share it with animal lovers, with people who are grieving, with teachers and therapists, and anyone who works with animals or with people in pain. Share it with your family and friends and social media communities, because Jambo and Cooper's story isn't just about one dog and one gorilla in one zoo. It's about the fundamental truth that loss and love are universal experiences, that grief is the price we pay for having loved deeply, and that comfort can come from the most unexpected sources if we're open to receiving it. Cooper entered Jambo's cage on that August Tatusitu, mourning as a lost, grieving dog searching for something he couldn't name. He found a grieving gorilla who needed exactly what Cooper needed, someone who understood. And together, they demonstrated that the most profound healing doesn't come from forgetting our losses or moving past our grief, but from finding others who can sit with us in that grief and help us bear the weight of it. They taught us that companionship in suffering is its own form of medicine, that we don't have to face our darkest moments alone, that reaching out for comfort, even across the boundaries of species and language and everything that seems to separate us, is an act of courage and wisdom. So comment below right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your story. Tell us how this touched you, because that's what Jambo and Cooper would want. Not to be remembered as an unusual news story or a viral video, but as proof that love and loss and the need for connection bind all living beings together in a web of emotion and experience that transcends every boundary we try to construct. Hit like if you believe animals deserve our compassion and understanding. Subscribe if you want more stories that prove consciousness isn't uniquely human. Share if you think the world needs to know that a sad dog and a grieving gorilla taught us more about healing from loss than most humans ever learn. Because that's exactly what they did. And their legacy lives on in every person who watches their story and chooses compassion, who sees animals not as lesser beings, but as fellow travelers through the joys and sorrows of existence, who understands that we're all connected in our capacity to love, to lose, and to find comfort in each other's presence. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Now go tell someone else this story, because stories like this one have the power to change how we see the world and our place in it.